Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. We're going to be doing another story from Robert Whiting's Japan, which you can find always at robertwhiting.substack.com or you can go to tokyojunkie.com. And today is a topic about how Japan became a key market for Hollywood. And it includes a review of a 2017 book called Screening Enlightenment by Hiroshi Kitamura. The subtitle is Hollywood and the Cultural Reconstruction of Defeated Japan. I think it's kind of interesting, and so we're just going to go ahead with it. And by the way, this came out just on the 18th, so 2 days ago, on Robert Whiting's Japan Substack. So you're getting something kind of fresh and timely. Okay, let's get started. Screening Enlightenment, an excellent work on how Japan became a key market for Hollywood by Robert Whiting. Tokyo. The occupation of Japan lasted approximately 6 years and 7 months, during which time the American rulers issued a total of 2,627 orders. Among them were the instituting of reforms, which included the disbandment of the giant zaibatsu conglomerates, the abolishment of the feudal agrarian system, the implementation of a war-renouncing constitution, and the elimination of the old system, in which the male head of the family had tremendous authority over marriage, divorce, and adoption. The elimination of this system meant that women now had equal legal status to men. Many of those inside the Tokyo-based Occupation General Headquarters, or GHQ, as it was known, and those who wrote about it, hailed this effort as a huge success. After all, they reasoned, the occupiers had remade what was essentially a feudal society into a modern democratic one, and in the process had helped their former enemies recover from a horrific defeat, providing food, clothing, medicine, and the means to rebuild a shattered economy. In fact, many termed their time in Japan with their Japanese friends as a, quote, golden honeymoon, one which created eternal bonds of friendship, mutual respect, and admiration. They pointed with pride to the way the Japanese took to such American institutions as dance halls, golf, Santa Claus, and democracy, with its refreshing tone of egalitarianism. See how the prospect of an American style middle class existence was intoxicating the nation, they said. And look at the high number of marriages between Japanese women and American men. Didn't that say something about what kind of occupation it really was? However, there were also those who thought just the opposite, pointing to the high handed manner often displayed by the American policymakers that perhaps did as much damage as the heretofore mentioned reforms had done good. Take the sudden restrictions imposed by the second wave of occupation authorities, who were alarmed by what they saw as a breakdown in discipline, manifested by record-breaking black market activity and a tsunami of streetwalkers or pan-pan girls around the city, upsetting conservative groups back home, sharply limited fraternization between Japanese Americans for 2 years, from 1947 to 1949. In one fell swoop, all Japanese movie houses, subways, banks, beaches, rivers, hotels, hospitals, nightclubs, bars, and private houses were declared off limits, and Japanese citizens were banished from all military clubs and bachelor quarters, where they had here till now been welcome. Moreover, there were several 100,000 Japanese workers in the GHQ, busily censoring newspapers, periodical, and radio broadcast critical of the GHQ, even opening personal letters and wiretapping telephone conversations. This was all in direct contravention of the Potsdam Declaration, which had called for the establishment in Japan of freedom of speech, religion, and thought. It was a remarkable, perplexing, and hypercritical policy of promoting democracy and freedom of speech while simultaneously practicing broad press censorship, stifling open political debate, and restricting fraternization between Americans and Japanese. For a time, the authorities even ordained separate train coaches for occupier and occupied. In addition, there was a sudden mid occupation switch from a pro union, almost socialist philosophy to one of the hard line anti communism one known as a reverse course, a policy which, among other things, enabled the pre war business combines known as zaibatsu to regroup. Many wartime leaders were depurged. The switch was prompted not only by the rise of communist power in China and on the Korean Peninsula, which threatened to engulf Japan, but also by the activities of a pro Wall Street lobby primarily interested in recovering pre war investments in Japan and making the nation an attractive place for American multinationals to do business. One of the more memorable feats of the occupation was the launching of an extensive campaign to introduce Hollywood films to the Japanese market, in which it disseminated more than 600 movies to theaters. In an alliance formed by the US government, the military, and American film studios, the campaign succeeded in earning money for the studios and theater owners in Japan, while showcasing the American way of life as a political, social, and cultural model for the war shattered nation, while at the same time limiting Japanese and other cinematic products. As author Hiroshi Kitamura demonstrated in his impressive book, Screening Enlightenment, published 2017, this undertaking helped transform Japan into one of Hollywood's key markets and played an important role in the re education and reorientation of the Japanese population on behalf of the US government. One of the favorites, SCAP, Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, promoted during this time were Madame Curie, The Yearling, Going My Way, Pride of the Yankees, and Casablanca. Stories of optimism, family, equality of the sexes, and perseverance in the face of adversity. All were popular with the Japanese public. So was Rhapsody in Blue, a film about the life of George Gershwin, which enjoyed a 10-week run at the Marunouchi Subaruza and reached thousands of fans at prestigious theaters. The film portrayed Gershwin's success as a musician stemming from his, quote, unbending will to express his creativity. It helped popularize American jazz at nightclubs, dance halls, and cabarets. Another hit was Little Women, 1949, based on the children's novel by Louisa May Alcott, which stressed the values of family unity, love, and compassion to overcome adversities of injury, heartbreak, and death. It featured the unyielding devotion of the four sisters of the story and was such a hit with the Japanese population that it caused a four sister craze in big cities, with girls having four siblings invited to free screenings. Gone with the Wind, 1939, was voted the best pre-war production in one magazine survey, followed by Rebecca, it was 1940, and Fantasia, 1940. In 1941, with the outbreak of war, Hollywood films had been banned completely from movie screens in Japan. Less popular was Union Pacific, 1939, a Cecil B. DeMille saga about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, released twice for a run of 2 weeks. Marketed as a tribute to the pioneer spirit of white Americans, perhaps the battles with the Indians triggered unfavorable emotions towards the white American occupiers in defeated Japan. Left unnoted in the film and by history was the work done by Chinese immigrant labor on the actual building of the 1,911-mile long tracks. Left off the approved list were Frank Capra's seething indictment of American politics as a cesspool of corruption, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Tyrone Power's The Mark of Zorro, 1940, which seemed an endorsement of sword fighting, a sensitive subject in an era where samurai films were frowned on. Also banned was Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, 1944, because a main character was a competent Nazi boat captain. The Great Gatsby, 1948, because it featured speakeasies, rum runners, joyriding, and bootlegging. And The Grapes of Wrath, 1940, The U.S. Army objected to the latter's release, claiming that its depiction of poverty and social inequality in the 1930s America no longer held true. The film was unable to enter post war Japan until 1960. Also banned were assorted war movies with unflattering depictions of the Japanese. Equally worth mentioning, perhaps, was the occupation's influence on or interference with Japanese films. As Kitamura writes, quote, SCAP censors hovered about the entire process, demanding changes and revisions of the plots, dialogues, and screen images. The occupiers' interventions often resulted in drastic modifications of film content. One memorable film survived the assault, Akira Kurosawa's magnificent classic, Drunken Angel, 1948. The film is about the unlikely friendship between a violent post war gangster, played by Toshiro Mifune, and an alcoholic slum doctor, played by Takashi Shimura, whose clinic is located near a filthy bog bubbling with methane gas. The doctor treats the Yakuza's bullet wound and discovers tuberculosis, then implores him to give up his outlaw way of life and take better care of himself. Mifune's character refuses and dies. As described by Kitamura, the Civil Information and Education section, CIE, forced Kurosawa to change the ending, in which the doctor parades the gangster's corpse around the rotten, disease-infested neighborhood. It was a scene intended as a protest by the Toho Studios, who produced the film, against the evil world. A SCAP official found the ending to be too gruesome and demanded an upbeat closure. As a result, a scene in which the doctor cures a young girl's tuberculosis is added, lending a note of optimism to the film. However, as fate would have it, the overall dark tone of Drunken Angel remained, vividly memorable in the way that it depicted the squalid conditions of life in the Tokyo underbelly during that era. The cheap bars, the pan-pan girls, the street urchins, playing in toxic, overflowing sewer water. Although occupation policy at the time forbade filmmakers from including any hint of the American presence in the country, this despite there being tens of thousands of American soldiers and civilians in the capital, and the streets of Tokyo being renamed with Americanized names, Kurosawa nevertheless managed to convey the American presence by having his gangsters and their prostitute girlfriends dress in Western-style clothes and showing them patronizing dance hall bands which played American jazz and featuring a female singer performing a bizarre number called Jungle Boogie Woogie, all of which were an obvious slam at the dark side of American culture that invaded the country. Drunken Angel also managed to blur the lines between good and evil and portray the two main characters as human beings, another violation of SCAP policy. SCAP hailed Drunken Angel as the welcome depiction of the, quote, inglorious end of the thug. But in reality, as Kitamura writes, it was a story of complex morals and mixed messages, which appeared to have gone over the censor's head. That's lucky for us, because today, Drunken Angel is regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. All in all, occupation policy, when combined with the casual racism displayed by some occupationaires, may have made America as many enemies than it did friends. Critics like famed lawyer Thomas Blakemore, who helped Japan draft a new constitution promulgated in 1947 that gave equal rights to women for the first time, among other things, termed the occupation overall, quote, a terrible waste of time. However, as author Kitamura, a professor at William and Mary, also shows, SCAP policies caused Japanese intermediaries and consumers to fall in love with U.S. movies during this time and serve as American programs' best publicist. Magazines like Eiga no Tomo, or Friends of the Movies, which sprang up during this time, were widely read, and Japanese audiences packed the theaters for new offerings from Hollywood. Film censorship ended in 1951, and by the time it did, Japan was Hollywood's best market, doubling its annual profit from pre-war days. Marilyn Monroe would visit to Tokyo to be mobbed by fans at Haneda Airport. William Holden and Elizabeth Taylor would also make appearances. Moreover, several Japanese films would win international awards, including Kurosawa's Rashomon 1951 and Ikiru in 1952, as well as Kenji Mizoguchi's Ugetsu 1953, Seven Samurai, and Godzilla followed in 1954, as Japan's export economy began to take off and enter the Japan's high-speed growth era, symbolized by the historic 1964 Tokyo Olympics, which introduced Japan to the world as a global economic power to be reckoned with. 70 years later, Japanese still crave American movies, as evidenced by the blockbuster performance of Tom Cruise's Top Gun Maverick and Thor, Love and Thunder, and others in Japan, as well as being avid consumers of other aspects of American culture: McDonald's, Starbucks, and Disneyland. Japanese cinema, for its part, is setting box office records. 2022's highest grossing film was a Japanese animated movie, One Piece, film Red. For more on this fascinating subject, read Screening Enlightenment. It will tell you everything you need to know about that era. Solidly researched and very well written. It is a superb book that will stick with you. The end. And I will provide a link to that book by Hiroshi Kitamura, Screening Enlightenment, in the description below. So please take a look. But also, please, if you like this, please like this video, subscribe if you haven't. And again, take a look at Bob Whiting's Substack. It's robertwhiting.substack.com. And I'm going to probably follow up tomorrow or maybe later tonight with another story that he just came out with. It's a 3-part series. And it's about things like corporal punishment and other exciting things. Yeah. So have a good day, and I'll see you again.